welcome everyone to this first webinar in a three-part series to discuss efficiency. Today in part one, we'll discuss how technology can lead to efficiency. I'm Nicholas Johnson, Kahua's Chief Evangelist and your host today. So let's start with some additional introductions. I feel really strongly that we've got a great panel today, and I'm very pleased to have each of these folks with us. So let me ask them to introduce themselves. I'll start with my friend Denny. Denny, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do every day?
Well, thank you, Nicholas, and hello to everyone. I am Denny DePalma. I am the General Manager of the Kahua Network. Previous to joining Kahua, I used to work for a large general contractor, construction manager, and materials manufacturer for a little over 32 years. Wide range of duties from operations, estimating, and accounting to eventually IT. And happy to be here today to talk about efficiencies with technology.
So Denny, that's a little bit about your professional life. What do you like to do when you're not working on technology and construction?
A lot of stuff with the family and try to get outdoors as much as possible and just try to keep moving and keep active. Excellent.
Okay, Manny, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me here today, Nicholas. I'm Manny Inamorado. About 8 months ago, I completed 34 years of government service, the last 10 as the Chief Information Officer of the New York City School Construction Authority. It was a great ride, and now I've moved on to becoming a consultant.
Excellent, Manny. We're glad you're here with us today. What do you like to do when you are, now that you're only consulting and you can do whatever you want?
Well, not whatever I want, because there's a list of things I need to get done in the house. But I enjoy pickleball. I go to lots of New Jersey Devils hockey games, and I really enjoy reading business and business-related books.
Excellent. Okay, and our last guest, my favorite, Carrie, introduce yourself, please.
Yes, thank you. Carrie Stieglitz. I'm with K-Volve. We are a management consulting firm that focuses on facilities and construction and removing silos in that space. We've been working on that with our mission statement for some time now. So I have a lot to say today in some opinions around technology and efficiency, and especially some changes we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years.
So Carrie, what's your role at K-Volve?
I am the president of K-Volve. I'm also a co-founder.
Now, how does somebody get to be co-founder and president of a company that's developing a mission statement? There's some history there, isn't there?
Yes. I mean, it's part stupidity, part opportunity, I would say. You know, you always have to be a little stupid to start a business. But I would say we really just, as a team, we had a passion for helping especially owners to kind of solve some of these industry problems. And we felt we could do that by forming our own company. So about 8 years ago is when we kind of separated out with that intent in mind. And just as a fun side note, we're coming up on about 6 years of the Kahua partnership as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you for being with us today. We're always glad to have Carrie with us. She's a great partner to Kahua. She brings a ton of expertise. And today she represents the consulting arm of this conversation. Manny, with his 34 years in public service, will represent our owner. And Denny, with his over 30 years as a contractor, will represent the contractor's point of view in this conversation about technology to enable efficiency. Well, if you don't know, Kahua's mission is to enable our industry to innovate. Our field of play has always been project management information systems. We'll refer to that today as PMIS. And now we've developed an asset-centric project management methodology for PMIS. Now, understanding this and understanding that there are still many owners and contractors relying on spreadsheets and point solutions, here's the first question I have for each of you. What do you guys see as some of the bigger hurdles, or perhaps the biggest hurdle around adopting a new project management information system? And Manny, if I can start with you, you represent the owners here. What might be a big hurdle for adopting this kind of new technology?
Sure. So it doesn't matter whether you're on spreadsheets or whether you're on a legacy application. Just trying to make the time to commit to moving yourself onto a more modern platform usually is where there's resistance. But once the leadership team makes that decision, then it's a matter of explaining it to the organization about why we're going to invest a good chunk of our lives into getting a new system up and running and in adopting all of the new workflows that will make our organization a lot more efficient.
Excellent. Thank you. That's insightful. So from the owner's perspective, this is not your day job. You've got a primary mission, and this is not it. This is to complement your mission. Carrie, you come from the consulting's point of view, and you've worked for all kinds of owners and construction entities. It is your day job. What do you see as some of the big hurdles around PMIS adoption?
I'd love to say people, that's low-hanging fruit, but I'll dig into that a little bit more. It is the day jobs, but it's also very strong sponsorship. So I was just talking about this with someone today, where if you're trying to do a PMIS adoption, it's part of usually a bigger transformation around changing the way that you manage projects, execute projects. And so having really great, strong leadership on that is always more efficient and creates a way for the project to have a pathway to success. So I'll take the easy one, which is people, but get a little more specific and say sponsorship.
Excellent. All right, Denny, what's your perspective on this?
Well, I think change is hard no matter what, even good change. It's just hard to change in general. So, I think people have a fundamental fear of change. And let's face it, we work in a very high pressure industry where there's big contracts, very big time constraints, safety, quality. And people are trying to mitigate their risk. So a lot of these systems can be very big. They reach all areas of the organization. So, to do that, you typically have to have a very good plan, good leadership, good buy-in from everybody. It can take up a lot of time and a lot of resources for everybody involved in the organization.
So time and effort. And I've heard you say before, I think you're a Simon Sinek fan. It's about knowing where you want to go. What's your why?
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. You always got to start with the why and what are you trying to achieve. So I know that, the webinar series is on efficiency, but, the first thing you got to figure out is effectiveness. Am I going in the right direction? Because it doesn't matter if you're speeding at 100 miles an hour if you're going in the wrong direction. So first, you got to.
That's a great point.
You got to figure out where you're going, and then you figure out the best way that you can get there and become most efficient at doing it. But effectiveness always comes first. It's
of no value to get to the wrong place really quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Excellent. All right. Well, I work under this premise. I was taught a long time ago that as adults, the way that we learn, two different ways really is adults. We learn by doing or by analogy. So I want to ask you to share some lessons learned from each of your past. Can you each think of an occasion where technology did not help create efficiency? And Carrie, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, technology is supposed to make our lives easier, right? But what I would say is you can have really great point solutions that solve a very specific problem. Yeah. But if they're siloed in data and they're only solving a single problem, then you could have a really great way to do one thing. But then when you want that data to move to the next step in the process, if that's a different point solution, you're going to lose the efficiency you would gain with technology. So having technology not talking to each other is a big issue right now.
Can you think of a specific example of that?
Yeah, so I did have a specific, I won't name names, but there's a lot of, like permitting environmental is a great example, right? So you can go get an off the shelf COTS software that solves that specific problem. But then what happens when you want to have inspections, daily inspections on that, and you find things and you need to have corrective actions, and the contractor needs to get involved on site. And so just having that exist in a single tool might solve a specific problem, but as soon as the problem gets a little bit bigger, then that issue becomes much more apparent.
Okay, excellent. Denny, what's your perspective? What's your take from again, with your background as a contractor? Can you think of a time where new technology did not help make things better?
Yeah, I do want to keep this a little bit higher level, and I know this is kind of sounding repetitive, but I'm very big on process, and having a very good repeatable process, and just really good, strong implementation practices. And when you deviate from that, you typically go astray and it's not going to be successful. So all the things that we've already talked about, knowing your why, knowing the goals, knowing what you're trying to achieve, to Carrie's point, understanding the bigger picture and not necessarily just optimizing for a little point solution, but what's the bigger picture of what we're trying to achieve? Getting the leadership buy-in, having a good plan, change management. And I think communication is actually very critical. I mean, when you're not communicating to everybody about what's being changed, why it's being changed, how it's being changed, you don't get the buy-in, and usually the projects don't end up being successful.
Yeah, isn't that usually when we get the most resistance to change, is when people don't know what's going to happen, and therefore they fear what they don't know?
Yeah, I think it always comes back to fear, right?
Yeah. Manny, from the owner's perspective, and gosh, you've been a CIO at some huge organizations.
Yeah.
What were some of the can you think of an example when, again, you implemented a technology and it did not really benefit?
Sure. I just want to pick up something that Carrie said, and that is when you pick up fantastic point solutions, it's all about the APIs in the background. They're going to share the right. truth, right? The data truth across your enterprise, so that nobody has to switch out of their screens to go to another product to figure out what is the data that I need. And if you're doing a good job of interconnecting the systems in the background through APIs, then you become a lot more efficient while giving people the tools that they want to do their jobs. Years ago, we implemented a very large and very, very well-known scheduling system, right? Has 2 letters. And the person who configured it did a fantastic job. But then it turned out it was just a little too difficult for the organization to use, for a lot of the folks to use. And people had to use it at very point times, right? They didn't have to use it full time. They didn't have to be a full-time scheduler. They just had to get their data in. So we realized, we had to build all these APIs and interactions with the scheduling system. So the scheduling system could do what it did best. It churned the schedule in the background, spit out the dates, figured out when things weren't going to be on time or when they clashed. But at the front end, we ended up building very simple applications where people could input their data when they had to do data entry and or upload their spreadsheets or whatever it is that they needed to do to get it into the application. And it made it much better than the original solution where people just couldn't get their time done. And we were managing 1,500 active projects at any given time. So it was kind of difficult for the schedulers.
A great example. I feel like though I've asked a couple of negative questions here. So let me turn that around and kind of move on to some good news. I ask you for an example of when technology did not enable improvement. Let me ask you now, can you think of a recent example when technology did indeed enable agility or greater efficiency, for your project teams? And Carrie, I'll go back to you for this.
Yeah, well, I want to go halfway in between too, right? Which is when we're talking about point solutions, Now let's maybe widen that up a little bit to the journey of the story. So if you're looking at PMIS, it's managing multiple needs around the project in one, container, but going to and building off of that scheduling example and also the stakeholder and the communication example. Let's talk about, hey, the owner has a really great PMIS and the contractor has a really great PMIS, right? So I want to talk about also just taking it from that point solution. Now we have two parties that have developed these into better databases. So within their own organizations, they're creating greater efficiency. So part of the reason why we love configurable PMIS specifically is the ability to create different digital forms and workflows. So now we're taking it one step up. We have these really great PMIS. We still have different PMIS, but let's take a step towards being able to be more efficient within our own organization. And I'll just leave a hanger there because I'm sure Manny and Denny have something to say. We're still missing that middle piece, which is the part in between where the two talk together.
All right, Manny, have you got an example that you could share with us?
So I'm gonna bring it right back to who we are here, right, and what we're discussing at the end of the day. But I want to talk about a very specific piece of it, right? When we rolled out the new Kahua in our organization, one of the things that we really used extensively that helped create a lot of efficiency for us was K-Builder. And having had a product that was on-prem, having looked at stuff that was SaaS, having something that we could configure and work with a real language tool helped us because we had done so much customization in our old product that we just couldn't bring it forward ever. And it just cost millions of dollars to upgrade it. And so having that tool and being able to basically keep the product current to the way that our organization changed over time, because it always evolved, really led to some efficiencies for us.
Excellent. So I'm gonna kind of dive in and probe a little bit here, Manny. You said that you had another product, and as you customized it, it sounds like you orphaned it. So I'm assuming this was a traditional software as a service, and in order to get it configured or customized the way you wanted, you actually had to go in and change that base code.
Yeah.
Therefore, whatever happened, whatever the vendor provided after that, you were not able to inherit. Did I get that right?
Well, we owned it, right, at that point. And yes, we did do upgrades, but they were infrequent because it cost millions of dollars to do the upgrades. There was just so much
because you had modified that base product.
Yeah. There was so much testing to do and then retraining. There was just a lot of work to do. Instead of having a product that was, kept alive, right, and current. And so that was really great in terms of what we ended up having.
Super. All right, Carrie, I'm going to come back to you for a second because Manny used the term K-Builder. And as a Kahua partner for all these years, can you explain to our audience kind of in layman's terms what K-Builder is and how that would have made a difference in that situation?
Yeah, that's a great example because we do work with multiple PMIS and each one we'll use the terms configuration and customization differently. Kahua is platform as a service, which means that they provide a tool to do low-code configuration or customization, as well as basic configuration. And so you can go in and make those changes without disconnecting from the source product. And I think this is important and unique to Kahua because some of the other products we work with, if the client needed something shifted to do the way they do work, which of course, who wouldn't want that in their software, they would basically completely disconnect from that source and they would create a copy or they would make their own version of that. But then when the vendor comes, they provide upgrades, updates to the functionality, new features. You essentially have to go back, reconnect, and reestablish your customizations. So KBuilder, we really like working with that because, of course, we want to help the owner to create software that's customized to their processes. But we don't want, and that was, you guys may have saw my eyebrows raised, millions to upgrade is not something that I deal with on a daily basis. So, it should be something that you double check it to make sure you don't want to, you may want to take advantage of new features and functionalities, but with KBuilder, you're never breaking that connection. So it's a big game changer.
Excellent. And KBuilder is available not just to partners like Carrie, but even our clients can learn how to use KBuilder for their own benefit. So, all right, I need to go back. I asked the question about examples of where technology really did help gain efficiency, help create agility. Denny, I didn't give you a chance to answer. What was your thought on that?
Well, I think we have a pretty interesting story that we can share here that's currently ongoing. We're dealing with a very large customer, and they have concurrent projects going on side by side with two different contractors. The first contractor is using our Kahua network, which allows everybody to stay within their own domain or version of Kahua, but yet in real time share information back and forth. So in this case, we're talking about RFIs and submittals, general contractor going in, entering that information into Kahua, and it being there right for the owner in real time. They can report on it, they can do data analytics, they can do whatever they want through the course of the project.
So each uses Kahua in their own instance, and the two instances or the two systems talk to one another.
Yep, exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
Sorry for the interruption. Want to add some clarity.
That's really good. And that kind of gets back to what Carrie said, where people are looking to make their own organization efficient with the point solutions that they're choosing. But we can go one step beyond that, because it's something that we've always talked about in this industry, right? How do we get benefit for everybody working on the project holistically? And with the Kahua network, we can now achieve what we've been talking about for literally decades in this industry. You have the ability to work the way that you want to work as a general contractor, specialty trade, and as the owner, and the data is the intersection of all of that.
Okay, I get that. So what you're saying is that it would really be of dubious value if the system could only be configured to the general contractor, yet we could share. If we could have this scenario where the GC's tool could talk to the owner's tool, that's of dubious value if the owner's tool only works for a GC, because they're not going to want to use it. And the subcontractor is not going to want to use one configured to an owner.
Right. And I think traditionally in this industry, we've had those challenges, right? Where some of these solutions have kind of fallen into one of these buckets or one of these roles or one of these personas, right? But, with our technology, with the Kahua network, we're now able to cut across all that. We enable people to work the way that they want to work, that's right for them, but yet have this seamless movement of the data across the various parties in real time.
So in this side of the story, Denny, then I'm a contractor and I put it into my system, which is configured for me the way I want to do business. But as soon as I make that available, as soon as I hit submit or save or whatever the business process calls for, the owner has instant, immediate access to that data, and it's in the form of data so they can mine it and report and so forth.
Exactly.
Did I get that right?
You did.
So what's the other side of this story with our owner?
Yeah, so they're kind of working more in the, I guess, quote unquote, traditional way of doing things, where the contractor they're dealing with is using their own system, not Kahua, not using the network. So they are basically duplicate entry. They're entering information into their own system and then having to go into Kahua to enter the information again on some type of delayed basis, whether, it'd be weekly, monthly, whatever, and sharing most likely limited information. We're doing what's required, but it's not real time. The data is, typically not in the fields. It's probably uploaded with PDFs, Excel spreadsheets, maybe Word documents, so on and so forth. So that the data isn't usable in a sense for like reporting or analytics, or, maybe the data gets integrated into other systems that the owner is extending to. You just don't have those capabilities.
So in this side, do I understand it? So the contractor here is going to put it in their system first, and then kind of periodically batch a bunch of files up to the owner's site.
Yep.
With just a minimal amount of data. So I see their owner, John Travolta's, hey, where's my stuff? When can I get my stuff? All right. So the better scenario then is to have these systems that are able to be configured for each party, yet connect the data as appropriate, as you'd expect, permissions and access and so forth, but appropriately connect the data.
That can all be controlled and configured and workflowed and all of that.
Excellent. All right. Well, that's certainly a great example, and it's cool that we've got some quotes. We're trying to be sensitive to the negative player here in this scenario, and not name all the names, but we do have a couple of quotes to share with you. And this first one: instant access to project data as opposed to limits and lag time made a clear difference in our project. We've seen in firsthand how our projects run better with this technology. That was from the owner's rep. From the contractor, what we hear is the connected PMIS network helps regain precious time and eliminate redundant data entry. We've seen this firsthand, and we're asking our vendor to include more apps. It's a real game changer. All right, super.
Nicholas, if I can just comment for a moment on that, right?
Please, by all means.
These are the small hidden costs in the projects. All of this duplicate data entry on just RFIs, when you multiply that by the number of projects, it's thousands of RFIs that went through our hands, and each one of them is a duplicate data entry and takes time, and it adds additional costs into the project.
Oh, that's a good point from the owner's perspective, Manny.
Yeah.
Every time a keystroke gets repeated,
right,
there is risk of somebody doing it wrong. And no matter how many times it happens, you, the owner, are going to pay for it. Ultimately, you're paying for everything. Yeah, that's a great.
Exactly.
All right, let's move on. Carrie, I'm gonna kind of continue this talk. So you've spent your whole career helping teams improve. What are your thoughts on this kind of connected network scenario?
Yeah. So this example I actually am familiar with this, but I'm going to give you a different customer example. So a slightly different turn on this. So when we first started looking at the trend in the industry of owners purchasing PMIS, one of the most common things was that the owner would demand that the GC log into their PMIS. And so because we wanted one source of truth, and the easiest way to do that, and one of the questions is always A, how do you get contractors to do it? And B, how do you pay for licensing? So going back to Manny's comment, you pay for it either way. You pay for it in inefficiencies, you pay for it because they're still maintaining their own. And of course, the GCs, the consultants, they all have their own internal processes, right? So us asking them to log into the owner system did not eliminate the need for them to still manage information in their own PMIS in the way that their organization wanted them to manage it. So most recently, we worked with an owner, I can say Pepperdine because she shared this publicly at different presentations as well. And so in this particular case, very similar, Clark was actually the GC. Clark uses Kahua, longtime user of Kahua. And we were able to, it just so happened it was Clark. Clark had already been selected. They had already kind of proposed that Kahua solution to them. And then Pepperdine happened to select Kahua as their PMIS. So they didn't realize it as one of their key buying features at the time because the two weren't connected, but they were very excited to learn that via the Kahua network that Clark could continue to manage their own internal workflows, their data sets in the same way, but it was exposed within the Pepperdine Kahua system. So they all had that same one source of the truth via the connected network. And I just want to hit on something that I said earlier, which is when you look at investing in technology solutions, you're trying to find something that increases efficiency within your own organization. So the ability to have two separate PMIS, each configured to the way those organizations do business talk together, is the big game changer here.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, thanks for adding to that. I don't want to continue to hammer on the same thing. These are great points, though. So let me ask about another new technology, and it's one that I mentioned earlier, one that's captured the attention of every construction owner that we've talked to over the last year or so. And of course, I'm talking about my favorite topic these days, asset-centric project management. We say that it's more of a methodology than a technology, but there is some underlying tech that enables asset-centric. So Manny, let me ask you first, what's the problem, kind of the primary problem, the big problem that we're trying to solve with asset-centric project management?
So the problem is that we get very, very excited about the construction phase. A little less excited during design, but we love to open those doors and having the kids come into schools in September. But the reality is I'm going to own that asset for the next 80 years. And so
we're going to take 2 years to build it, but you're going to keep it for 80 years after that.
80 years. I've got to maintain it. I've got systems in there that need to be maintained over the long term. And so I've got all of this knowledge that was gained during construction, be it that essentially we call closeout, right? All the documentation about the building, how to operate it, part numbers, warranties. How do I effectively hand that over in a comprehensive way so that it makes sense, and then continue to add to that building over time and continue to look at it as an asset that is going to appreciate over time in terms of what we're going to do to it, and then we're going to continue maintaining it for the long term.
So it's more than just a project problem. It's a life cycle issue that you're trying to solve.
Exactly. It's a life cycle. I'll give you a great example. I was working recently with a client, and they had a roof. It was a leaky roof in a very large building. And so they went ahead and said, okay, send it to a firm. They did a design on replacing that roof, and then they sent the roof design to be bid out. In that process between design and going to bid it out, they figured out that the roof was under warranty. And so they scrapped the design and they scrapped what they were doing and went back to the original manufacturer of the roof to have it repaired. They just didn't have good records in place to make solid decisions there.
Excellent. So they did avoid paying for this themselves.
Yeah, at the last minute.
Thankfully. Well, all right. So that's a really good example of why this matters. Denny said, what's the why? I was going to ask, what's the big deal if you don't get this data? That's a good example. What happens though when today, how do you get the data? What's the process look like today before asset-centric as a methodology?
So today, the data arrives in all kinds of different ways. We say we start project closeout on the first day of the project, right? And as we get the manuals, as you get startup videos and get all that, it all kind of sort of gets moshed together in a document management, but it's just not set up in an easy way for people to then use long term.
So does it come to you as the thumb drive at the end of the project with 100,000 PDFs? And
it comes as a thumb drive, as a large drop of large paper on your desk, as a PDF, you name it, and it arrives. Videos, you name it, and it arrives.
So it's just not very usable, not very accessible.
No.
So your folks have a hard time getting to it in a timely fashion.
Yeah,
Thankfully,
and then,
in the example you gave, they did, but
yes.
I imagine there are plenty of chances when that does not happen.
Right. And then we had to spin up a new project and commit resources to making this process better. But trapping data, actually trapping operating manuals without associated data does not work very well long term. Yeah.
Denny, you've been on the contractor side of this. What's the process like for creating that thumb drive? Is there better, what was your best case for that?
Well, I don't think it's going to be a shock to anyone when I say that it was extremely non-glamorous and grinding work to try to come up with that as you're trying to close out a job and finish up and wrap up and move on to the next one. And you're just trying to gather all the information that's kind of occurred over time and, get it over to your customer, your client, as best you can in the format that you can do it, knowing that you're not using the same systems and, you're kind of going your separate ways and, we'll kind of give it to you in the best that we can. But as Manny said, it was in all kind of different formats and, I'm sure it's very tough on the owner.
And it sounds like it takes some time for the contractor to do this, that this is this is labor intensive on both sides.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially when you're waiting to the end, you had a multi-year project, maybe multiple phases, and you're waiting to do all that. And then, with some of the other project management systems on the market, not necessarily focused on this, some of those collection abilities throughout the course of the projects, they don't exist.
So, Carrie, you're the consultant here. We keep talking about the problems before asset-centric. Tell us just in a few words, how does asset-centric work and how do we make it all work? What's the magic here?
Yeah, I love the examples that were given too, because and this is a great quote from Bert, who's part of the Kahua network as well, the community. You lose information and you essentially efficiency, not only in the process of the asset handover, but then also how that data is received, right? Unstructured, unformatted. I think the recent FMI was over 90% of the data received is actually unformatted and 96% of it is never used. So of course, as a consultant, we're always looking at, well, why is that happening? And I like to use the example for those of you that actually have to do timesheets every Friday. You always do them on time on Friday, right? But you still have to remember what you did the week before. How did I actually break down and spend my day? Well, I answered an email over here, I went over there. So as you're trying to reflect back on when an asset was engaged, when you picked up a piece of information about an asset, it's always harder to do it at the very end of the project. And we talk with a lot of owners where they say project closeout starts on day one. Well, great. So we'll just put a little extra effort up front, coming up with an asset taxonomy, link that taxonomy into our construction project. And so how it works in Kahua is once you get that asset structure established, when you start to identify the to-be assets or the assets that are currently existing that will be modified in the case of, a roof replacement. Right. All the work is up front establishing, okay, what is our common language for the assets we're creating? And then as the project progresses, all you're doing is tagging that asset. So in each one of those, and I wish you had I don't know if you have the slide, but of all of the apps that have there's a lot of apps that are asset-centric enabled. And so as you're going through managing the project in PMIS, it's just one extra selection. And what that gives you is a database of connection for all these communications, digital workflows. So you're actually creating structure around the data as you're progressing through the project. And it's a very light lift for the project team to do this. It's just one extra drop down as they're just doing their day jobs. So that's part of the reason why I really, really like how Kahua has kind of defined asset-centric within their platform. But you cannot do it without having upfront conversations with operations, with all the folks. So you got to get the folks in the room. You got to get it agreed upon up first, and then it's a very light lift.
And that's where a partner like KVolve would come in to help with those upfront conversations about what are the assets that will be important for you to track with your CMMS tools, with your facility management tools. What are the attributes that are important about those assets? What are the documents that you need to collect along the way? I suppose that's what KVolve would do, is help the owner understand that. Am I right so far?
Yeah, I would say if we're talking about efficiency, why not pick somebody whose job it is to help people figure this out, right?
Yeah.
So that is primarily what we do. And I think having that facilitation, because you're cross-departmental, be an outside party is a great choice.
Yeah, and because you're going to want to go to the operations, you said cross-departmental, you're going to want to go past the 2-year people to the 80-year people and ask them the question, what are the critical assets you want to track? What are the attributes? So operations will help you guide that process. And it sounds like you said all that takes place really upfront before project users start doing the normal business processes of construction, which would be RFIs and submittals and change order requests and supplemental instructions and daily, all those things that can create asset data. Those things project people will do. All that's kind of set up for them when they get in then.
And usually those downstream folks are very excited to participate. And I think everybody kind of knows it's a pre-existing problem, but the solution is not always apparent until you have a technology that's encouraging the behavior.
All right, super. Thank you for that. I hope that's a good explanation for folks. We're certainly excited about it. And already across North America, we've seen incredible case study that backs all this up, that this is working, it's real, and it's something you should learn about. As an owner of assets, you should absolutely know about it. And we'll give you a chance to learn more later about that. So, all right, we're getting to the point where we want to take some audience Q&A, but I've got one final question before we go to audience, and I want to ask each of you this question. It's about how vendors like Kahua build technology. So first, Denny, I'm going to come to you and ask if you could explain in layman's terms the difference between our low-code platform technology versus traditional software as a service technology. Carrie touched on this earlier as we talked about K-Builder, but flesh that out for us and just help the audience that doesn't know, necessarily what our tech stack is, but what's the difference between these two kinds of products? Software as a service like Constructware and the tool that we created all those years ago, and this modern low-code platform technology we use now.
Yeah, and thanks to Carrie for setting the stage earlier. So SaaS, software as a service, is what you'll hear a lot. Yeah, that you're basically just renting software from somebody else. That's what you're doing. It lives in somebody else's data center. They wrote the application. And typically what you have is low configurability, the low ability to customize it. At times you can extend it and integrate it. But in essence, you're renting software from somebody else, and it typically is what it is. Okay. With application platform as a service, you get all the benefits of SaaS. So for example, Kahua, we do have applications. They do come out of the box. They are meant for specific verticals. But in addition, it's also a development platform, and that's kind of where the platform part of this comes in. And there's multiple ways that it could work. We talked about K-Builder, where you could build your own applications, and that could be done, as you said, Nicholas, through we could certify you to do that and build it yourself if you have the people and the resources. We have our partners and our partner network, people like Carrie who can do that and help. Also with us, we can do it as the Kahua team. We could do that as well. But also it also gives us a tremendous amount of configurability within our product, the ability to extend the base applications as well. that you typically don't get as software as a service. So it's not just necessarily building your own applications, but there's actually ways to extend or change or modify or configure the existing ones. Because I'm a big firm believer that the software should revolve around you and your processes and not the other way around.
All right. So with traditional, well, let me start with our platform as a service technology. If I want something different in my software, I can be taught to do it myself. I can hire somebody in the ecosystem like Carrie, or I can go to Kahua to do that. But if I'm traditional software as a service, all I can do is go to the vendor. I can go to the Kahua in that instance. And I have to
usually
wait
what happens is
priority for them.
And they have a laundry list of stuff, right? They have a lot of other clients. It's kind of like we'll put it on the list is typically what you hear.
Yeah, I recall when many people in our audience would know that we had a company. Many of us were part of a company before our founders founded a company that was Constructware. That product came to market in 1997 as the first internet-based product, and only 9 years later, Constructware, the product, was sold to Autodesk. Only 9 years old, and our wish list, I do remember, we were software as a service. We were the only people that could modify it, add it, change it, extend it. You had to come to us, and our wish list when we sold the product was 2,200 items. 2,200 things that we said, yeah, that's a good idea. We'll try to do that for you. We'll put it on the list.
And I want to add a little more color to that, because either people who have experienced a different PMIS or currently shopping for a PMIS, there's very distinct words that vendors will use that you need to watch out for. One is configuration versus customization. Another one that people will do is say, well, can you do it this way? They go, we can repurpose this. So meaning it exists, but you're constrained to what already exists in the system. So you can rename a field, or you could create a field in a different tab that's not user friendly, or you could copy it, but then again, you lose that connectivity. So we've worked with a lot of different systems that all claim they're configurable and customizable, but the devil is in the details. It's how they do it and the words that they use that most folks that are shopping or experiencing PMS for the first time don't know enough to question that specific term until they get into it and they say, well, you said you can make it do this. And you go, no, we said we could repurpose a field, and we only have 8 fields you can repurpose. So there's very, very distinct ways and that happens too.
Hey, Nicholas, if I
Those are all
can.
very good points, Gary.
Nicholas,
Yeah, excellent. Go ahead, Manny.
So, you just have to think of the end of a football game and you're trying to leave the stadium, and then you become trapped in the parking lot. And that's where a lot of our requests would go, trapped in the parking lot, right?
Yeah.
And it was about their, where they were going with their product may not be where you needed to go with the product, right?
Well, and sometimes it's just a matter of bandwidth. I know at Constructware we had a limited number of developers. Every company has a limited number of developers. Unless you offer a platform that others can, that the world can author on.
Right.
Which, was wonderful. We have a limited number of developers that work directly for Kahua, but we have this ecosystem that can be unlimited. And our wish list for that reason can be very short at most times. So.
And frankly, when we did our evaluation, we looked at a variety of products, and this is what won it, right, for Kahua. We had never even heard of the product, but when we saw this functionality and what it was going to mean for us, it's what made the sale.
Excellent. Okay, thank you all for that. That's been great. I appreciate your contribution there. We'll turn to the audience now, and I have a question, and I will remind everyone they can put their questions in the audience participation part. We'll get to as many as we can. First one comes from a first-time caller, long-time listener. Brian asks, if an owner has a PMIS system and in all the agreements identifies that each general contractor must use the owner's PMIS system for the project, meaning all the data is the owner's data. The first time Brian heard about K-Builder, which my take on the explanation is the bridge for an owner and a GC to link their softwares for real-time data sharing. Okay. K-Builder's not the bridge. What Denny said, he's the general manager of the Kahua network. That's the bridge between the two. K-Builder is a tool that helps you write applications. Okay.
Right.
Two-part question, he says. Which is best for the owner? Making the GC use the owner software or using K-Builder? Using the bridge is what really I think Brian's asking here. To bridge the two softwares, and how does the owner make sure the data is required to be shared does indeed get shared?
So
I have thoughts on that. I'll let you go first though.
So look, from our perspective as an owner, we want data to populate our system so that we can make decisions and have a long-term, be able to do reporting, and then have a long-term base of data so that we can manage the portfolio. How you get it to us is really up to you, right? And if there's a connected way that we can do this so that we are both mutually benefiting from it, that is the ideal scenario.
Because as you said before, Manny, if a contractor has to put it in two places, ultimately you are paying them to do that.
For it.
I am paying for them. And I will tell you this, there have been instances where someone forgot to put that clause in the contract and it was instantly a change order, right? Because I'm now requiring them to do work that was not in the original contract.
Yeah.
Harry, you were going to add to that?
Yeah. I mean, so I'll talk about it strategically and tactically as well. But when we look at where the industry is going, especially in construction, the relationship between the owner and contractor is heading in a direction that's collaborative, right? Whereas some of the past contract methods, some of them still be used quite a bit, but some of the new alternative delivery methods really encouraging the owner and the contractor to work together towards a common goal. Kahua is a piece of that. And so if you approach it from that mindset strategically, engage your vendor community early on, get their feedback, let them know it's coming, treat them like they are a stakeholder, not just somebody who's an afterthought. We've had clients engage them in process workshops and review of design. So especially most owners know who their majors are that work on the majority of their projects. So that's the first step, is strategically looking at your contractor, somebody that's helping you to contribute to your data, and what's the best way to do that. And then the tactical is the same, right? It's putting that clause in the contract, going above and beyond, not a simple 1 or 2 sentence, contractor will use owner system, but you say something like contractor will either use owner system, or you can propose Kahua via the connected network. We can be flexible on that. Here's a list of all of the business processes that will be in our owner system. So they know exactly how many times they're logging into the owner system, because it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. If you don't give them that detail, you might see a lot more contingency, right? Because 2 sentences isn't enough for them to know, okay, how much am I going to have to be doing duplicate work here? And again, working with them, if there is duplicate work, we didn't talk about this, Kahua has import functionality. So there's a lot of different ways that we can get information in the system. Ideal state is always they both own Kahua, right? But there's also a lot of different things you can do in between.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Well, we've come to the end of our time. So there's a question I like to ask at the end of each of our webinars or podcasts that we do, and it's, where can our audience go if they want to learn more? So obviously, our Kahua friends and fans can go to kahua.com. You can contact us directly there, and we'll be happy to answer any further questions. Carrie, if someone wanted to reach out to K-Volve and learn more about your business, where would you send them?
You can, if you have questions directly to me, you can always contact me via LinkedIn. Also, kvolve.com, www.kvolve.com.
Excellent. Manny, if our audience wanted to reach out to you, should they find you on LinkedIn, or should they contact you to get to you?
They can just come over to the house. I'm here most days. Just drop in.
It's good to be retired.
Maybe recruiting some help with that to-do list, huh?
Well, the dog needs to go for a walk once in a while, and I'm sometimes I need some help there. But no, you can catch me on LinkedIn, send me a message. I'll get in touch with you, or you can text me 212-363-0420.
Excellent. Well, Manny, Carrie, Denny, thank you all for being part. Thanks to the audience for being with us this hour. We hope that it was very valuable to you, and we look forward to seeing you on our next part 2. We'll give you some information about that coming up.